Hello, kamusta? This is Brian and welcome to my first video on YouTube. So, for my debut episode, I am doing a speed build of a classic Filipino architecture dating back from the Spanish colonial times. It's called the Bahay na Bato, or Stone House in English. I originally made this in November of last year, but it wasn't until this year that I finally decided to consolidate the whole thing into one video. When I made this for the first time, it almost took me a whole week to finish the build itself. I used a combination of custom content that I found on the Sims resource and items from all of the packs that were released until Island Living. So right now, I'm finishing the front yard of the house. It actually took me quite a while to complete that process because I kept on dragging the bushes because the game won't allow me to continuously spawn them. So I had to move that part a bit faster than the others. So right now I'm placing the fountain and currently finishing the front, and we're going to move on with the fence, the perimeter fence on the backyard. So the floor plan of the Bahay na Bato is actually rectangular in shape. It's an elongated version of the Bahay Kubo. The Bahay Kubo was cuboidal in form, so this one was a larger version of it, and the Bahay na Bato is usually 2 stories high. The lower floor is usually for the ancillary activities, while the upper floor is for the private residence of the homeowners, as well as the azotea or the balcony, which overlooks the backyard garden of the house, which you will eventually see in the speed build. In contrast, the Bahay Kubo was also elevated, but the lower floor isn't actually a space, but it's composed of wooden posts that protected the whole structure above from flooding and from earthquakes as well. So we've recently just finished making the outline of the ground floor. So right now we're doing the main entry or the porch area of the house. So we've put some large archway and the main door. So now we're gonna furnish it with some wallpapers, stone wallpapers, to accentuate the stone elements or the natural elements of the house. And we recently put out marble tiles and stone tiles on the inside. So the lower floor is actually called the zaguan. A zaguan is usually the storage area or the storage space for the homeowners to keep their valuable stuff. So the zaguan is also used to accommodate horse carriages, as well as carrozas or processional carriages, wherein religious figurines of saints, the Blessed Virgin Mary, and Jesus Christ are often displayed on their feast days and during the Holy Week as well. The Spanish introduced Catholicism when they first arrived in Cebu in the 16th century, and ultimately, majority of the whole country was converted into Catholicism, and this played a very important role in the colonization of the Spaniards. So as you've seen earlier, I've put the staircase leading to the second floor. Staircases in the Spanish vernacular is termed as the escalera. Also, when I went to the back of the house, I changed the walls there because I was trying to extend the space for the azotea above, and I was also making some headway for the aljibe. The aljibe is actually the water tank for the household. It's an earlier form of a rainwater harvesting system that's going to be used for their daily activities such as gardening, for washing the dishes, their clothes, for bathing. So obviously there are a lot of elements that were influenced by the Spanish. So now we're placing these very familiar elements of the Bahay na Bato. These are called the capiz windows. So based from the name itself, these windows are made up of capiz shells. Nowadays you can't really find these anymore because the capiz shells are actually endangered and further production is threatening the species to become fully extinct. So the capiz shells that are used in the window can be harvested in Pangasinan, Bohol, Capiz, Masbate, Sulu, and other parts of the Philippines. It is known as Capiz by the Tagalogs, Lampirong by the Visayans, and Kalampinay by the Bicolanos. The shells are harvested, cleaned, and scraped to reveal the translucent shell. So, the Capiz is actually quite similar to the shoji screens of the Japanese, and They both offer privacy, but at the same time, they are quite transparent in order to allow light to permeate into the house. Additionally, the Capiz windows are also composed of other elements as well. These include the espejo. So the espejo is a panel between the window header and the eaves for the exterior wall, and above the door jamb and ceiling for interior partition. Also, it's either of wood frame checkerboard design with capiz for additional natural light, or a calado, meaning pierced work, for added ventilation. Another element is the persiana. The persiana is also known as the louver window. It's a window with a wooden frame and thin slanting wooden slats that's either fixed or movable as solar protection to admit natural ventilation. Another one is the pasamano. The pasamano is the horizontal member between the window opening and the ventanilla that serves both as base of the window and handrail. Another one is the ventanilla. The ventanilla is also called as the small window. The ventanilla is between the floor and the window sill that's used to allow natural light and ventilation to the interior. It's provided with an external protective enclosure of decorative wood balusters or ornamental metal grille and operable wall. So for this build, I used a set of balusters to cover the ventanilla. As you may have noticed, I've put in a lot of columns in the build, and this is in reference to one of the characteristics of the Bahay na Bato. Again, it has another inherited characteristic from the Bahay Kubo, which is the integration of wooden posts. This time, in the Bahay na Bato, the wooden posts are built alongside the stone walls or the dingding. Since the Philippines is susceptible to earthquakes, it's imperative to have a very strong structural integrity. So, this is one of the innovations that were implemented in the creation of the house. The Bahay Kubo may seem to be simple in form, but it actually has an interesting structural aspect to it. And a lot of people may not know this, but wood is actually a resilient building material. So when in the event of an earthquake, it can withstand the high intensity of the magnitude as compared to other materials such as stone. This is because the fibers and the wood are very intact. So when an earthquake were to strike the house, it could be able to sway along with the earthquake as well. So it just goes along with it. So after the earthquake, most if not all parts of the structure are still there. As you can see, I recently done the initial layout of the azotea as well as the other rooms. The window facing the azotea is quite different from the others. This is where I'll be putting the banggerahan. The banggerahan is actually part of the kusina or the kitchen. The banggerahan is the place where wet dishes or utensils are often left to dry out in the sun. So the second floor of the house is composed of the following spaces. As soon as you come up the stairs, you'll be at the kaida. A kaida is also called as the antesala. It's where guests are usually met by the homeowners, and as soon as you go to the kaida, you either go to the comedor, which is also known as the dining room, or the sala, which is the central living room. The sala of the homeowners are usually adorned with some of the most expensive, exotic, and very rare treasures that they take from their journeys abroad. So apparently, the Bahay na Bato was constructed for many noble families in the 19th century. Their homes was their means to flaunt their prominence in terms of their social status and exhibit the rich history of their respective lineages. So right now, I'm putting some corbels under the eaves of the roof. Corbels are architectural elements that are decorative in nature, but they also support the load of the roof. And these are usually made out of wood and carved out depending on the owner's choices and preferences in the design. So you may notice that the second floor actually extends beyond the ground floor. This is one of the features of the Bahay ni Bato, which is called the volada. The volada comes from the Spanish word volar, meaning to fly, and this refers to a cantilevered walkway that runs along the window side around the house. So the volada is actually a projection or a protrusion from second floor to allow the lower floor to become protected from the sunlight. So the space behind the staircase is where we'll be putting the central living room or the sala. The sala of the house is furnished with a grand piano as well as a set of sofas and paintings that showcase the family's many different family members or their achievements as well. The sofas are made up of the finest fabric, and the sporting body of the sofas are made up of nara or ipil, endemic hardwood trees in the Philippines. So the main living area is usually furnished with a large crystal chandelier, a hardwood center table with the finest ornate designs, as well as an oval side table or consolas. For the older owners, you can usually find rocking chairs in the main living area as well. The bathroom of the Bahay na Bato is usually furnished with a shower area as well as a toilet, but the toilets back then didn't have a very advanced plumbing system yet, so they had to fill in their toilets with ashes in order to mask the nasty smell. And fortunately for them, that was the only thing that wasn't glamorous in their home. Since most of the families during the 19th century are Catholics, they even allot a specific space for their prayers and rituals. This is called the Oratorio, or the prayer room in English. You can even see life-size statues of saints, amulets, and offerings for the patron saint of the family. For the kusina or the kitchen of the house, it usually has a paminggalan, nivera, or ice chest. Since there weren't any freezers at that time yet, this was a way for them to be able to enjoy ice and cold drink. The kitchens are usually filled with clay pots as well as many silverware and metal kawas or pans. The azotea and the kitchen are usually interconnected. The azotea is actually a supplementary or a service kitchen for the home. For the owners of the home, their rooms are usually called simply as silids or cuartos. In the comedor, there are two large fans placed at each end of the table. These are called puncas. The puncas are operated by the servants whenever the owners and the guests are dining. The comedor or the dining room of the house has a large center table. It's usually called the mesa. The mesa is adorned with very long tablecloths and toothpick holders, and it has a capacity of at least 12 to 36 persons. Technically, the Bahay na Bato style is already extinct, but there are still a few houses that are still intact, such as the ones in Vigan, Ilocos Sur, in Calle Crisologo. The houses were retrofitted, and the lower floor was converted into commercial spaces while the upper floors remained as purely residential spaces. The Bahay na Bato is undoubtedly an iconic part of Philippine architecture, and unfortunately, it's on the brink of extinction, and there are only a handful left in the country. And as an advocate of heritage conservation, I think it's imperative for me to bring up the topic that we should be able to know what's really going on behind the scenes, because nowadays, most of our heritage structures are being torn down, being replaced by many different types of establishments rather than promoting adaptive reuse. I think it's really important for us to know what's really going on, because if we continue to be ignorant on the narrative of culture and heritage preservation, then who are we really as Filipinos? I think it's really important for us to embrace the essence and the reasoning why these structures were built in the first place. So I think that's basically the whole overview of the Bahay na Bato. And from this point on, I'll be doing the rest of the speed build as well as the house tour. Thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you learned something new today. Maraming salamat. I wish you guys Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays, or as we Filipinos would like to call it, Maligayang Pasko.